All right, guys. I really want to thank everybody for joining our first North American-based webinar with Mastt. My name is Jon Chesser. I'm the VP of North America for Mastt. Recently joined Mastt about 3 months ago. Prior to that, I was part of building up another construction tech software company for about 14 years. We sold that last fall to a larger software company, Hexagon, and was introduced to Mastt through some of the investors. Long story short, went to Sydney, where these guys are based, had a blast, met a lot of their customers, including some of the guys at Jacobs and AECOM, and was really impressed with what they've been able to do down in Australia. So happy to be here today. Happy to be representing Mastt in North America and looking to expand their reach internationally. Today we're going to be joined by Nick. Nick is a product manager with Mastt. Specifically, he deals with the risk module. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're also joined by Barton. Barton is a project director with Jacobs. He's currently using Mastt today on a program. And so a little bit later in the webinar, they're going to go through, they're going to kind of give you a little bit more intro and tell you more about Mastt and what they're doing today. For those of you who may be new to Mastt, might not know that much about Mastt. Mastt was really built for project and program managers, typically that are working on the client side, representing that owner as either an owner's rep or kind of that client side PM. It was built by a program manager to make the lives of these program and project managers easier, but also to improve that kind of collaboration, communication between that PM and the project sponsor that's on the asset owner side. They do it in some pretty unique ways. It's how they link the cost and the risk and the schedule together, and there's some pretty innovative things how they're doing this in an automated and real-time way, and super excited for you guys to hear more about that. But before we get started, Nick, if you can just go to the next slide. Just a couple of housekeeping things. So we have muted all the attendees just to kind of reduce noise and make this as smooth as possible. If you do have questions, we'd love to hear your questions. We really value your feedback. There is in your Zoom panel, there's an opportunity to enter your questions, and depending on if we have time at the end, we'll probably read through some of those questions and direct that to either to Nick or Barton. And then finally, we are recording this, so don't feel like you have to take too many comprehensive notes. You're going to get a copy of this at the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick and to Barton, and I'll see you guys as we get close to the wrap up.
Thanks, John. And hi, everyone. My name is Nick. I'm a product manager at Mastt. I will do a bit of an intro here, and then I'll ask Barton to do a bit more of a deep dive into his profile so everyone can understand who he is and what he does and how he's been using Mastt. But to set the scene a little bit, about what we're going to cover today, because today is about risk and Barton's journey of using Mastt to help manage risk on some of his projects. So I thought I'd give you a bit of a rundown of how we've got to where we are, if that's okay. So it's probably no secret to any of you that capital works projects can often, unfortunately, run over time or over budget, and that has happened many times in Australia, and I'm sure that it also happens many times around the world, including in the United States. And as John and I and the team at Mastt, including Doug Vincent, our founder, who was a program manager working on these projects, knows and has been learning by working with clients around the world, in a lot of cases, what's also interesting is that even on these very complicated projects, a lot of them are using Excel. And in the case of risk management, that is especially true. You see a lot of these types of risk registers that I've got on the screen. So that's something that we've been observing with our clients who we help manage schedule or program and cost, as well as risk, that they were using these spreadsheets to manage risk in this way. And also, when we digged a little bit deeper into that, we found this very common first step, which was basically something like, okay, the new project's kicking off. It's maybe in design or inception stage, and it's time to start managing our risks. So what do? We go get the old risk register from the last project that we worked on as a PM, and we use that as our starting point, the old copy paste. And so that was a really interesting learning. It showed that people are, trying to have consistency between their projects, and that they also want to have a starting point to be able to do risk management. Potentially, though, that continuing to use Excel, I think, also presented a number of other opportunities that we wanted to explore at Mastt and help people sort of do this better. And so the way that we started to think about that, about how we could work with clients to do better, was by thinking about, I guess, risk through a framework. And you may be familiar with this framework if you've done a ISO standard risk course or training. So bringing the framework into the picture and making that easy to consider how you do risk, that was one of the opportunities that we learned about when we went and talked to these people managing risks out of the spreadsheets. And then another really important thing that we learned about and actioned was actually around understanding who is served through the use of this risk management framework. And if you think about a huge capital works project or group of projects across a program or across a portfolio, each of these different stakeholders, if they're on the client side, or they might be working for a contracted project management company or cost management company working on the project, each of these different personas at these different levels has different needs. And so we started to think about and ask people what those needs were and how they could be better served by a risk system. And some of the stuff that we started to learn were things like this: at an owner's level or at a portfolio manager's level, really boiled down to people understanding what are our absolute number one risks. What are the big red things across all of the projects that I'm managing that I need to be aware of? Who's responsible for them? What are we doing about these really big, hairy risks? Down at the project level, you've got people, using spreadsheets, using tools, writing big formulas into cells that are potentially breaking, calculations happening between tabs and tabs. At a program level, some, poor soul, unfortunately, has to aggregate many of those spreadsheets at times to try and get an overview over all of the program. And so there's problems there associated with how risk information across the projects is wrapping up, and how old is the data that I'm actually seeing here? Is this still even relevant? Where should I look to get the latest information? And so when we've been designing out and building the risk system at Mastt, these are the different types of people at these different levels that we were trying to serve. And might be a good segue to introduce Barton, because Barton has either been at or at least served people at all levels of this, I'm sure, from your career, Barton. And so with that scene sort of being set about with that scene being said about, how we're trying to think about managing risks better on capital works projects at Mastt and this project program portfolio, why don't you, I'd like to hand over to you for a second to do a bit of an introduction to yourself, Barton, and so everyone can understand who you are and what you do before we kick off.
Yeah, sure, Nick. Thanks for that. Look, warm welcome to my industry colleagues in North America. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today about my experiences using Mastt. And I thank Nick and Jon for the invitation to come and speak to you today. So I'm Barton Johns, as you all know by this stage, and I'm a project director working for Jacobs in Sydney, Australia. So my projects that I work on are generally for the Australian military. So I work on government style projects. And my current portfolio of projects is in excess of $1 billion, Australian dollars, that is. So I've got about 4 projects which I'm looking after. Some of them I'm very active on, others I'm overseeing a team of project managers for their delivery. And on each one of those projects, we use Mastt to manage cost, schedule, risk, and communications of monthly reporting and the like. So yes, very used to using Mastt. I've used it for at least the last 2 or 3 years. And yeah, I'm pleased to be able to share my experiences using the risk module today. So thanks, Nick.
Great, thanks, Barton. So how we've planned to do this today for everyone, and to make sure that we maximize the amount of time that I guess Barton is sharing his experience from that usage, is we're going to walk through, you know, a bit of a journey together based on that risk framework that we shared, that the system is based on. And as we go through each of the steps, we're just going to pause, and maybe I'll ask you a question, Barton, and then we can talk through from a systems perspective as we go through this sort of risk management journey together. How has the system sort of served you, and what have you been using the system to do from a risk perspective? So if we kick off with really important first step, before you dive into smashing in your risks into the risk register, or maybe now Mastt, it's really important to establish the context. So could you talk a little bit about your context for the projects that you've been delivering, and how did the system help you sort of with that setup?
Yeah, so step 1 when managing risk on a project is to understand your particular client's risk framework. I'm quite used to the risk framework that the Australian military like to use on their capital facilities and infrastructure projects. But having said that, it can often be a long time between setting up the project risks. The projects can last for 3, 6, 9 years working for the Australian military. So it's important to, well, traditionally revisit that framework, but with the benefit of using Mastt, where Mastt has the support of the Australian military in their capital facilities and infrastructure, at least. And I know in other parts of the Australian military's capital infrastructure delivery, is that risk management framework has been built into the risk module. So there's one step already at the commencement of your risk journey on a project, where a lot of work is done for you. So yeah, the experience has been good using Mastt. It allows us to really start honing in on the project risks, and quite often you'll find as a project manager, when you're engaged early on a project, is that the client or the sponsor will immediately start informing you of their big risks that they're aware of for the project, and you want to start tracking them from day dot. So without having to troll through PDFs and large reams of paper, and being able to open Mastt and having that preloaded in there for you is a major benefit to project managers, and makes you look good in front of your client, and also allows your client to really just start on that risk journey with you and make it a really a quality exercise rather than an exercise of administration.
Yeah, that's great. And we can dive even deeper, I think, into the frameworks when we get to the evaluation step, because I'm sure people are interested in, what if I'm not using the Australian military risk framework? What, how can I use Mastt? And we've obviously got configurability and options to support that too. But let's take the next step, I suppose. So after we set the context, it's really important to start figuring out what are all of our key risks. And we might just consider risk identification and analysis and evaluation and setting your mitigations all together here. Because I know that for you on your projects, you've been conducting, a number of workshops to do these steps sort of concurrently with key people in the room. So I'm interested in understanding a little bit more about how you use Mastt to identify risks, assess their causes and consequences, evaluate them, and set any required mitigations or strategies to minimize the risks?
Sure. So as professional project managers, we are aware of what your traditional project risks are. So we will start to populate Mastt with traditional project risks, or even risks that we think may be applicable that we want to test with project stakeholders. So we'll use Mastt to insert those risks. On some of my projects, we've already had existing Excel registers before we had the opportunity to use Mastt. So there was also an exercise on some of those projects to transfer those risks into Mastt, which is pretty straightforward. Mastt prompts you to enter in risk details, consequence cause details, risk ratings, mitigations, action plans, and post-mitigation ratings. And then it goes a lot further than that when we start talking about costs, but I'll leave that to you, Nick, later in the workshop. But yeah, traditionally we'll hold an early risk workshop soon after our appointment. Once we've got a good grasp of the project scope and we've defined that scope and signed that off with the client, and perhaps we've visited the site or sites for the work, then we will review the risks in a risk workshop. So that risk workshop will be attended by just the key project stakeholders. So your direct client, the project sponsor, and any key stakeholders from the particular site or sites where you are conducting the work. So this would be done on a project by project basis, and then feed into, well, it does, in my experience, feed into a program dashboard view for our client on risk. So yeah, as I said, it's very intuitive. We establish our risks in the system. In a workshop, we can add new risks. We actually share our screen and walk through the risks on Mastt with the client, which we have found is a lot more engaging and keeps everyone awake, really, rather than the traditional way of entering rows in a spreadsheet. Oh, someone at the back of the room can't see that fine print, so you need to zoom right in. And then as the poor PM who's entering these risks as you go through, you lose where you are in the spreadsheet, or it freezes. You just can't please everyone. But you know, Mastt is it's a web page format, so it's very easy for people to follow in a room, but also remotely.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Covered everything there.
So then
Nick,
is
or was there
your,
something?
I was going to say, so you're identifying these risks, you're filling them in using this system, and I think people can see, you know, what that looks like, a little bit of a snippet there about what that might look like. I think something important to just talk about here is, you know, if you've got the system instead of a spreadsheet, you know, what does that mean for the quality of the information you might be capturing? You know, if you've got a framework set up in a specific way where, you know, pre and post mitigation is required, and, you know, people are whacking whatever into a cell, maybe you've got different project managers on the projects, you're a project director on Barton, and, you know, if people are doing that differently project to project, you know, what does that mean? What would that mean, you know, in your experience as a project director, and what does it mean, you know, now that you're using Mastt?
We've lost spreadsheets, Nick. We've had spreadsheets that have just gone completely AWOL after workshops. You know, you tend to run these workshops in clients' offices, and you may not have a network connection at the time. You might just be simply presenting straight to a screen, and that version that's been updated, you know, in a lot of detail with the client goes missing. So the benefit as Mastt is you make sure you're on the network, you run your meeting that way, and you know that you've got the assurance that all the data that you've populated is going to be, you know, stored in real time. So, you know, it's a big reassurance for a project director that that information isn't going to be lost. But also when you talk about applying the risk ratings pre and post mitigations, you know, that little tile that you've got there we go on the next slide. It's already pre-populated with the specific risk rating matrix for my client, and I know it can be done for other clients if they have a slightly different structure. but really you just walk through it, that little table that you can see over to the right with the coloured dots, and you assess the risk likelihood with everyone in the workshop, as well as the consequence of the risk, and you click the button and it applies that risk rating. So extremely intuitive, and yeah, it's been a good experience in the workshops going through these ratings. Spreadsheets can, if you're reusing templates across projects, the spreadsheets can draw from tables on other hidden sheets sometimes, and all you need to do is add a row incorrectly, or add a column into your risk register, and it might be pulling the right data, and all of a sudden your risk ratings are all out, and you've got post-mitigation risk ratings which are higher than your pre-mitigation ones, and it makes you look like a real noob. It doesn't reflect well on your business or you as a project manager.
Yeah, I mean, you're lucky if it breaks and it gives you an error so that you know it's broken. But I think what you're talking about is even worse, where it doesn't actually break. It just starts changing the calculation slightly and you might not notice. And then all of a sudden,
you know what, that happens more often than it completely breaking, in my experience.
Yeah. And just on this, a point I wanted to make with the frameworks here, just to build on what you were saying, Barton, is we've got the capability in Mastt to alter this evaluation framework or risk framework for different clients. So while we also support Australian military projects who have a standardized format according to their risk management plan across projects, and we make sure that our consequence and likelihood ratings are always up to that standard. The system isn't based on that. So we have people deliver education capital works projects. We have people deliver airport infrastructure, and they have a different risk management framework or plan that's been set from a governance perspective over all their projects, and we can set the system up in a way to make sure that the ratings are consistent on their projects, and it's configurable in that sense. So that's something I just wanted to highlight. I think something that's really interesting after this, maybe that initial evaluation, Barton, is then, okay, we've got our key risks, we've got the right people in the room, we figured out which ones are the big ones. What are we gonna do about it? And I think this is another key step where we're trying to move people away from setting actions to meeting minutes, or setting responsibility inside yet another column or row in the risk register spreadsheet, and do something better. So could you talk a little bit about this part of the risk framework and what you're doing to do this better?
Yeah, sure. So Mastt prompts you through the various steps of adding in a risk. So as you can see on the screen there, you've entered your risk. You immediately have the option to add a cause or a consequence, which in turn gives you a button to move into your mitigations. So you can apply a responsibility against a mitigation action, which is extremely handy, and Mastt will help you to establish the various responsibility owners for the risks up front, so you can have that pre-populated before the workshop. And risks are either open or closed. So when you review these risks later on, if it's still showing as open, it's open, and it means that action hasn't been actioned. It does quite often happen when you're running through an Excel spreadsheet that it takes so much time to run through it, that you get to the end where actions are being applied, and you say, oh, we'll post the workshop, we'll allocate actions, review the minutes, and look for your own actions, and then carry out your own actions, which does not tend to happen. The Mastt system keeps it very clear what's still open and where people haven't performed their actions, and it also exports for us a monthly project risk report, which we attach to our monthly project report, and that too prompts attendees from the workshop or action owners that they've still got their risk mitigation actions open.
Yeah. I mean, that's now we're getting into number 6, which I suppose is this communication. One thing I wanted to just pause on though for a second, because I remember I had the pleasure of watching you do one of your workshops in Mastt, because we were really excited to see, you know, how you were doing this. And one of the really cool things that I remember you doing, because you had key sponsors in the room across military for the projects that you were doing. And one of the great things that you were doing after you had your scores in was you had everyone looking at this, one of the views in Mastt, and we have many visualizations of risks to try and get that better engagement with the system. And, you know, people are really drawn to the big red ones in the top right-hand corner, looking at this scatter plot. And you were doing something, I think, you know, quite interesting by almost letting the meeting be guided by the people in the room who wanted to focus on the big red things rather than be working through methodically down the list, even if that meant you're spending all your time burning through, you know, very low risks.
Yeah.
Which might not be.
I think working with military, I think they're by design looking for the risk that we're trying to hide from them. For what reason, I don't know, but yeah, we're quite often tested. So once we've entered the data and we can show them this visualization of the risks, it's pretty clear for anyone seeing this for the first time that, hey, that big red dot there, right off to the top right, must be the biggest risk for the project. Let's have a look at that. So, you know, we've decided to not necessarily go through every individual project risk. We had about 70 on the recent project that, you know, Mastt sat in on for that workshop. We focused on the highest risks for the project, and using this scatterplot diagram, that was made extremely easy. And I felt that the stakeholders trusted that we were looking at the risks that are the biggest risks to them. And then we click on that bubble and we go into it and we review the risk, we review the causes, the consequences, and the mitigations. So that's particularly handy when it's not your first risk workshop on the project, but it's a subsequent one, say at an iterative design milestone, when you want to review the status of risk, whether it's been mitigated partially or wholly through design. You want to be able to target those high risks. And if you do have a limited time for your workshop, say most of ours are about 2 or 3 hours. They have been longer historically, but we've found that we've really not got the engagement that we were after. We focus on 2 to 3 hour workshop, and we focus on those highest risks. And the scatter plot makes that much easier to do than scrolling up and down through an Excel register.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you mentioned a little bit about this already, and this is one of the things we see a lot, unfortunately, with those workshops. When people sort of get the brief back, it can be really tough to keep that engagement as you go through all of the cells, and let alone asking someone to review every single cell from a huge spreadsheet after the meeting that day or in previous days. So we try and make that a bit more, you know, fun and interactive, but it's also about saving you time. And I think it'd be good to just recap again. I think you mentioned some of the attachments and reports that you were creating in Mastt that helped do that follow-up communication after the session. So how are you then using the system to then communicate back to the stakeholders, either at the finalization of the workshop that you might be doing or as part of your normal drumbeat of monthly reporting?
Yeah, sure. So we can export an Excel registered, a register to Excel from Mastt. So, you know, if people want to go down into the weeds, you know, they're more than welcome to, and we download that and attach that to our monthly report. That's what our client is used to receiving in a monthly report, so that's what we issue. But Mastt have developed a snapshot risk profile for the project, which can be downloaded likewise. And that shows simple pie charts, you know, identifying the number of risks that are open to closed, or, you know, the number of high risks, very high risks, medium, low risks that you've got on the project. and how they're split, in terms of the ratio over the whole project risk profile. So really, really easy to, again, for the reader of the monthly reports to be able to hone into those risks that matter.
Excellent.
Hey, Nick, I think we're probably getting towards the end here, so maybe just we got maybe a couple of minutes just to wrap it up, if you could.
Will do. Thanks, John.
Yep.
Thanks, and thanks, Barton. One thing I just wanted to spend sort of 30 seconds on, you might be watching this webinar and thinking, that sounds interesting, but I've already got a risk management system, and so, why is Mastt better? And I think we get that question a lot. There are services that do risk management software for capital works, but I think the key reason is that when you talk about risk and you talk about communicating risk, there are all those benefits, but Mastt also does more than risk, like John mentioned. Mastt is also helps you managing cost and schedule and program. And so when it comes to integrating costed risks that you've held contingencies against, one of the great advantages of Mastt is it also helps you add that to your forecasting automatically. So when you're cash flowing out the next 12 months or the next 24 months or however many years of your project to come up with a forecast, as you're adding risk into the risk module in Mastt, you can also create forecasts based on the money you're going to hold in case those risks are realized. And across a portfolio of projects or a program of projects, having that visibility in real time to the owner or the person providing that money is going to mean that as risks are realized or as projects go through phases where risks aren't realized, you're going to have the ability to understand how you can give back money to the program or the owner. So if you held $1 million on your project in risk contingency, but that risk was never realized, having real-time access to seeing that risk in the forecasting module in Mastt is going to mean that you can ask the question, okay, what are we going to do with that $1 million? Are we going to give that back to the owner? Are we going to reinvest it in scope to deliver a better project? We might want to reinvest it in another project over here that's having a really hard time. And so one of the awesome abilities in Mastt is because risk and cost are integrated. You have that visibility over all projects. They're all singing off the same song sheet, and you can compare apples for apples and make a better decision about where you're spending your money. John?
Well, thanks a lot, guys. Sorry we ran a little bit over time. Unfortunately, we don't have any time left, I guess, for questions, but really thanks to Barton. Really appreciate it when our customers come out and talk about Mastt, and Nick, appreciate your time today. My contact information is there. Would love to be able to, follow up with you guys, give you stuff. If anybody wants to see a demo of how this actually works in the software, would love to show you that to you, as well as how it integrates with cost and risk. So for that, we'll wrap up the webinar today, and hopefully you guys can join us for future webinars. We'll have a series of these for the North American market. Thanks a lot.